They whispered behind my back at his funeral. Gold digger, fortune hunter. His own children spit at my feet, but when the lawyer opened that sealed envelope, their smug faces crumbled. Because Victor didn't just leave me everything. He left them a truth that would destroy their perfect lies forever. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button if you're ready for some serious karma, and subscribe because you've never heard a story like this before. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. I stood alone by the casket, my fingers gripping a single white rose so tightly the thorns had drawn blood. I didn't feel the pain. I couldn't feel anything except the weight of 200 pairs of eyes boring into my back, their judgment heavier than the September rain drumming against the cathedral's stained glass windows. 18 months. That's how long I'd been Victor Ashford's wife. And in that moment, surrounded by people who'd known him for decades, I had never felt more like a stranger. Disgusting. The words slithered through the pews like smoke. I didn't turn around. I'd learned not to. 34 years old, and she trapped a dying man, probably counting his money while he took his last breath. My jaw clenched. They didn't know. They couldn't know. But silence had become my armor, and I wore it well. The funeral service was a performance. Victor's son, Brett, delivered a eulogy that painted his father as a devoted family man, a titan of industry who'd built an empire from nothing. He choked up at all the right moments, dabbed his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. His sister Vanessa sat in the front row, draped in designer black, her sobs echoing through the cathedral with theatrical precision. Victor's brother Howard stood stoic and dignified, the picture of grief-stricken family solidarity. I'd met them exactly 3 times before today. Each meeting had ended with threats. As the service concluded and people filed past the casket, Vanessa broke from the procession. She was tall, angular, with her father's sharp cheekbones and none of his warmth. She stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, mixed with champagne on her breath. "I hope you enjoyed your little performance," she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Playing the grieving widow. We all know what you are." I met her eyes but said nothing. 18 months, she continued, her lips curling into something that might have been a smile on anyone else. You couldn't even wait until he was cold before you started planning how to spend his money. Did you practice looking sad in the mirror? Brett appeared at her shoulder, his face flushed with anger, or alcohol, or both. "This isn't over. My father wasn't in his right mind. We're going to prove you manipulated him, coerced him, probably drugged him. You won't see a penny of his estate. We'll see you in court," Howard added, joining his nephew and niece in their united front. "And when we're done, you'll wish you'd never heard the name Ashford." They swept away, leaving me standing there with my bleeding palm and a worn photograph in my pocket that none of them had ever seen. A photograph that told the real story, the one they never bothered to ask about. 7 days later, I sat in the waiting room of Caldwell and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. The chairs were leather, the carpet was thick enough to lose a marble in, and the grandfather clock in the corner probably cost more than my car. Through the frosted glass doors, I could hear voices rising in anticipation. Laughter even. They were celebrating already. I'd arrived early, parking my modest sedan 3 blocks away between a Bentley and a Tesla. I wore the same simple black dress from the funeral because it was the only one I owned. My hands were folded in my lap, and I was trying to remember the breathing exercises the hospital therapist had taught me 2 years ago. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The doors burst open, and they arrived like a storm. Brett in a suit that cost more than my daughter's first year of medical bills. Vanessa in head-to-toe Chanel, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. Howard with his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression already victorious. They were followed by their own lawyers, an army of briefcases and billable hours. Brett saw me and smirked. "Enjoy your last taste of luxury, sweetheart. When we're done with you, you'll be lucky if you can afford bus fare." Mr. Caldwell appeared in the doorway of the conference room, He was 70, if he was a day, with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like someone's kindly grandfather. But his eyes were sharp as broken glass, and I knew Victor had trusted him for over 30 years. "Please," he said simply. Everyone inside. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A panoramic view of Victor's empire spread out below us like a kingdom. The table was a single piece of polished mahogany that could seat 20. They took their seats on one side. Brett, Vanessa, Howard, and their legal team. I sat alone on the other side, with an empty chair beside me that felt like a canyon. Caldwell settled at the head of the table and opened a leather portfolio. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Victor Emmanuel Ashford, executed on March 15th of this year, 6 months before his passing. The will was witnessed, notarized, and Mr. Ashford was evaluated by 2 independent physicians who certified his sound mind and capacity." Brett's lawyer leaned forward. "We intend to contest." Caldwell held up one hand. "You will have that opportunity, but first we will proceed with the reading as requested by the deceased. Are we clear?" Silence, then nods around the table. "Very well." Caldwell's voice took on a formal tone as he read through the standard legal language. Appointment of executor, funeral arrangements, charitable donations. Then he paused, looked up at the assembled faces, and continued. "To my beloved wife, Diana, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, business holdings, personal effects, and liquid assets, without restriction or condition." The room exploded. Brett was on his feet shouting. Vanessa's face went white, then red, then white again before she slumped in her chair, her hand pressed to her chest. Howard was pounding the table, demanding an explanation. The lawyers were all talking at once, voices overlapping in a crescendo of outrage and disbelief. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd known, of course. Victor had told me, but hearing it spoken aloud, seeing their faces, feeling the rage rolling off them in waves, it was almost too much. "This is insane." Brett's voice cut through the chaos. "He wasn't in his right mind. She poisoned him against us, manipulated him, probably forged the whole damn thing. Mr. Ashford," Caldwell's voice was ice, "I assure you that everything was done according to the law. However, there is more." More. Vanessa had found her voice, though it came out as a croak. What more could there possibly be? Caldwell reached into his portfolio and withdrew a second envelope, this one sealed with red wax. "Your father left video testimony to accompany the will. However, he stipulated specific conditions for its viewing." "What conditions?" Howard demanded. "Mrs. Ashford must be permitted to speak without interruption, to tell her side of the story. If anyone leaves this room, if anyone interrupts, the video will not be played, and all parties forfeit any right to contest the will or seek understanding of your father's decision." Brett's lawyer started to object, but Brett held up his hand. His eyes found mine across the table, and for the first time, I saw something other than contempt, calculation, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of doubt. "Fine," Vanessa said through gritted teeth. "Let's hear what lies she's prepared." All eyes turned to me. My mouth was dry. My hands were trembling. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, but now that it was here, the words felt like stones in my throat. I reached into my purse and pulled out that photograph, the one I'd been carrying since the funeral. I placed it on the table, where everyone could see. It was a picture of a little girl, with no hair, wearing a hospital gown covered in butterflies. She was grinning at the camera with all the fierce joy that only a 7-year-old facing death can muster. And beside her, sitting on a pediatric hospital bed, was an older man with kind eyes, holding a book and making what appeared to be a monster face. "That's my daughter Lily," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "And that's Victor, 2 years ago. 6 months before we got married. This is where it started. Not at some fancy party, not on a yacht or at a country club. At St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, in the oncology ward." I took a breath and let the memories flood back. Lily was 7 when she was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the aggressive kind, the kind that requires immediate treatment and costs that would make your head spin. I was a single mother, working as a waitress at a diner, cleaning offices at night, and doing data entry from home whenever Lily was sleeping. I had insurance through the diner, but it was basic coverage. When they told me the experimental treatment that could save her life would cost $300,000 and wasn't covered, I thought my world was ending. Vanessa was staring at the photograph now, her expression unreadable. I sold everything I owned. I borrowed from everyone I knew. I took loans from places I'm ashamed to admit. And it still wasn't enough. Not even close. I was sleeping in chairs at the hospital because I couldn't afford a hotel, and I couldn't leave Lily alone. I was living on coffee and whatever the nurses snuck me from the cafeteria. I had given up on everything except keeping my daughter alive one more day, one more hour, one more minute. My voice cracked, but I pushed forward. Victor had been volunteering at St. Catherine's for 15 years. Did you know that? Silence. They didn't know. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, he would come to the children's ward and read stories. He did all the voices, acted out the parts, made those kids forget they were sick for an hour or two. Nobody knew who he was. He never told anyone his last name. The staff called him Mr. Books because he showed up with a different story every time. He donated millions to that hospital, anonymously. The entire West Wing was built with his money, but his name isn't on a single plaque. I saw Brett's jaw working, grinding his teeth. He met Lily first, not me. I came back from the bathroom one day and found this older man sitting on her bed, making monster sounds while reading Where the Wild Things Are. Lily was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in weeks. I stood in the doorway and cried because I'd forgotten that sound. That's very touching, Howard interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But it doesn't explain. Let her finish, Caldwell said sharply. You agreed to the conditions. I nodded my thanks and continued. Victor started coming more often. He'd bring new books, tell stories, play games with Lily when she was strong enough. And he'd bring me coffee. We'd sit in that horrible waiting room with the flickering fluorescent lights and the chairs that felt like concrete, and we'd talk about nothing, about everything, about books and music and the weather, about anything except cancer and money and fear. One night, Lily took a bad turn. They rushed her into emergency surgery, and I fell apart in the hallway. Victor found me there at 2 in the morning, sitting on the floor, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe, and he told me about his wife. I glanced at Vanessa, your mother, Catherine, how she died of ovarian cancer 10 years ago, how he'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd missed the signs, how by the time they caught it, it was too late, how he'd spent her last months trying to buy time with the best doctors, the most experimental treatments, flying around the world, chasing miracles that never came, how she died anyway, and how he'd never forgiven himself. Tears were rolling down my cheeks now, but I didn't wipe them away. He told me that he'd become estranged from his children after Catherine died, that they blamed him for not being there, for working too much, for being absent. And he was right. He had been absent. He admitted that. He'd failed them when they needed him most. Brett's face had gone pale. But he also told me that he'd tried to make amends, that he'd given you everything you asked for, money for your business ventures, your legal troubles, your scandals, that he'd covered your mistakes and paid your debts and protected your reputations because that's what fathers do. I looked directly at Brett. Even when you stole from his company, even when you, my eyes shifted to Vanessa, sold company secrets to his competitors, even when you, now to Howard, did things I won't mention here because Victor made me promise not to. The silence was deafening. He said he'd spent 10 years trying to buy your love back, just like he'd tried to buy Catherine more time. And it never worked, because the only times he heard from any of you was when you needed money or when you wanted him to fix your problems. You never called on his birthday, never visited just to talk, never asked how he was doing. You showed up when you needed something and disappeared when you got it. That's not, Vanessa started, but her voice died. 6 months after we met, Victor called me to his office. I thought he was going to offer me a job, maybe as Lily's full-time caregiver, since the treatment was showing promise. Instead, he offered me something I never expected. He said he'd pay for all of Lily's medical care, past and future, all the bills I'd accumulated, everything. But there was a condition. I paused, knowing this was the moment they'd all been waiting for. He wanted companionship, real companionship, from someone who saw him as a human being, not a bank account, someone to have dinner with, someone to talk to, someone to sit with in comfortable silence. He told me he'd been diagnosed with congenital heart disease and had maybe 2 years to live. He was tired of being alone, tired of being used, tired of pretending relationships mattered when everyone in his life only saw dollar signs. "So you married him for the money," Brett said flatly. "No," I met his eyes. "I married him because he saved my daughter's life and asked for nothing in return except kindness. Because he became the grandfather she never had. Because in the year before we got married, he taught me that goodness exists in this world. Because when he proposed, 6 months later, it wasn't about romance or passion or some fairy tale. It was about family, about choosing to spend his last days surrounded by love instead of lawyers and people who couldn't see past his bank account." I pulled out another photograph, this one of our small wedding. Just me, Victor, Lily, and a judge in the garden of his estate. I insisted on a prenuptial agreement that left me nothing. Absolutely nothing. Victor had his lawyer draft it. Then Victor had his lawyer destroy it. When I found out, I was furious. I told him I didn't want his money, that I'd married him for all the right reasons, and I could prove it with that prenup. Do you know what he said? No one answered. He said, I know you don't want my money. That's exactly why you deserve it." The words hung in the air like smoke. "When you found out about our marriage, you showed up at his house in a rage. Do you remember? You demanded he undergo a psychological evaluation. You accused me of elder abuse, of manipulation, of everything except murder, though I'm sure you thought that too. You threatened lawsuits. You called the media. You made sure everyone knew that Victor Ashford's gold-digging wife had trapped him in his final days. You disappeared from his life, and he let you go. He cut you off financially and told you to earn your own way for once. And you know what happened? Nothing. You didn't get jobs. You didn't apologize. You doubled down. You hired private investigators to dig up dirt on me. You spread lies on social media. Strangers confronted me in parking lots. I received death threats. Someone threw a brick through my car window while Lily was in the back seat. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, but you never came to see him, not once in the last 18 months of his life. When his heart started failing faster than the doctors expected, when he needed round-the-clock care, when he couldn't walk or feed himself or do any of the things that made him feel human, you weren't there. I was. I fed him. I bathed him. I read to him the way he'd read to all those children. I held his hand through the bad nights when he couldn't sleep because the pain was too much. Lily video called him every day, showed him her artwork, told him about school, made him laugh when nothing else could. I was crying openly now, and I didn't care. The last 6 months, he was in home hospice. Morphine drips and oxygen tanks and equipment that beeped constantly. He was embarrassed that I had to see him like that. He apologized for being a burden. Victor Ashford, who'd built a billion-dollar empire, apologized to me for being a burden. His last words to me were, "You gave me the family I always wanted." He made me promise to use the money for good, to help people the way I'd helped him, to build something that mattered. And then he died, holding my hand, surrounded by Lily's drawings, taped to the walls because she wanted him to have something beautiful to look at. I wiped my eyes and looked at each of them in turn. So yes, I married a billionaire. And yes, I'm his widow. And yes, he left me everything. But I didn't marry him for his money. I married him because when my world was ending, he showed me that kindness still exists. And when his world was ending, I wanted to show him the same thing. The room was silent, except for the sound of the rain outside. Vanessa was crying quietly, her mascara running in dark streams down her face. Brett was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. Howard had his eyes closed, his face ashen. Caldwell cleared his throat gently. "Are we ready for Mr. Ashford's video testimony?" Heads nodded slowly, reluctantly. Caldwell opened his laptop and turned it so everyone could see the screen. He pressed play, and suddenly Victor was there, sitting in his study, looking frail but clear-eyed. The video had been recorded about a month before he died, and seeing him again, alive speaking, felt like a hand squeezing my heart. "If you're watching this," Victor's voice crackled through the speakers, "then I'm gone, and you're all sitting in that conference room, wondering what the hell I was thinking." He smiled, that gentle smile I'd fallen in love with. "I want to start by addressing my children. Brett, Vanessa, I know you're angry, I know you feel betrayed, and I understand why." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. "I failed you both when your mother died. I threw myself into work instead of being there for you. I tried to fix everything with money instead of time and presence. That was my mistake, and I've carried that guilt for 10 years. I tried to make amends by giving you whatever you asked for, but that wasn't what you needed. You needed a father, and I gave you a checkbook." Brett's jaw was trembling. "But here's what I need you to understand. I forgave you for everything. The theft, Brett, $2.3 million you embezzled from my company. Thinking I wouldn't notice, I covered it up to protect the family name. The corporate espionage, Vanessa, selling proprietary information to my competitors for your own profit. I settled that quietly. And Howard," Victor's eyes hardened slightly, "convincing Catherine to change her personal will before she died. Keeping that money for yourself instead of sharing it with your niece and nephew as she intended. I knew, I always knew." Howard's face had turned gray. "I forgave all of it because that's what family does. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. You treated me like an ATM machine for the last decade. You showed up when you needed money and disappeared when you got it. When I got sick, none of you visited. When I got married, you attacked the only person who'd shown me genuine kindness in years. You chose greed over love, and that was your choice to make." Victor paused, took a labored breath. "This woman you've called a gold digger tried to refuse my help 6 times. She insisted on that prenup. She worked part-time, even while taking care of me, because she refused to be dependent on anyone. She donated her entire salary to St. Catherine's Hospital, to the same programs I'd been funding anonymously for years. She didn't know I knew that, but I knew everything." He smiled again, softer this time. "My estate is worth $847 million, but here's what Diana doesn't know yet." I leaned forward, my breath catching. $500 million is already designated for charity. The Children's Hospital where we met, cancer research, programs for struggling families who face the impossible choices she faced. It's done, irrevocable, already in motion. My hand flew to my mouth. I had no idea. The remaining $347 million goes to Diana with one instruction: create the family foundation we dreamed about. Help others the way she helped me. Change lives the way Lily's smile changed mine. Victor's expression grew stern. "To my children and my brother, you're entitled to nothing from my estate. But Diana has agreed, without my asking, without any condition, purely from the goodness of her heart, to establish a trust that will provide each of you with $1 million annually. But there's a condition. You have to earn it." Brett looked up sharply. "Work for the foundation. Help people. Learn what money actually means when it's used to save lives instead of just sitting in accounts, making more money. Prove that you're my children, not just my heirs. Prove that the people I raised are still in there somewhere, underneath all the entitlement and greed." Victor leaned toward the camera, his eyes intense. "And here's the twist, the thing I haven't told anyone, not even Diana." My heart stopped. "I'm not actually dead." The room erupted in chaos. Everyone was shouting at once. Brett lunged toward the laptop. Vanessa screamed. Howard was on his feet. demanding an explanation. But Caldwell held up both hands, his face grave. "Please," he said loudly, "let him finish." We all fell silent, staring at the screen in shock and disbelief. Victor chuckled weakly. I know. Dramatic even for me, but hear me out. By the time you watch this, I will be dead. That's a fact. The doctors gave me weeks, maybe days, but I wanted to see how you'd all react when you thought I was gone. I wanted to know what you'd say at my funeral when you thought I couldn't hear. So I had my body double. Yes, I had a body double. It's a long story. Lie in that casket. I was watching from the balcony, hidden behind the curtains, seeing everything. I felt dizzy, the funeral, the casket. It was all. I heard every word you said about Diana. Victor continued, his voice harder now. Every cruel assumption, every vicious lie, and I saw her stand there and take it with more grace than any of you have shown in years. I saw her hold her tongue when she could have destroyed you with the truth. That's the woman you called a gold digger. He coughed, and the sound was wet and painful. I'm recording this now, and by the time Caldwell plays it for you, I'll be gone for real. This time, truly gone. But I wanted my final act to be this, showing you who you really are. And more importantly, showing you who she really is. Because maybe, just maybe, if you see it clearly enough, you can still become the people your mother and I always hoped you'd be. Victor's eyes found the camera, and it felt like he was looking directly at me. Diana, my dear, I'm sorry for the deception. I'm sorry for the pain. But I had to know if they could see past their own greed to recognize real love when it was right in front of them. I hope by now they do, and if they don't, well, you're strong enough to build this foundation without them. Thank you for the best 18 months of my life. Thank you for showing me that family isn't about blood or money. It's about showing up. Take care of Lily. Take care of yourself. And please, if they're willing to learn, give them a chance. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Vanessa's sobs broke the silence, deep and wrenching. "Daddy," she whispered to the empty screen. "Daddy, I'm so sorry." Brett's piece was in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Howard sat perfectly still, tears running down his weathered cheeks. I found myself standing, though I didn't remember deciding to. I walked around the table to where Vanessa sat and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes, full of pain and shame, and something that might have been hope. "He wanted us to be a family," I said, silly. "It's not too late. It's never too late." She grabbed my hand and held it like a lifeline. 6 months later, I stood in the bright, modern lobby of the Ashford Family Foundation's 10th clinic, watching as doctors and nurses prepared for the grand opening. Vanessa was leading a tour for donors, explaining the patient advocacy programs she'd developed. Brett was in his office upstairs, managing the financial assistance department, with a dedication that would have made his father proud. Howard had resigned from his position and entered therapy, working through decades of regret. Lily, now 9 and cancer-free, ran through the lobby with a group of other children, all of them clutching books for the reading program Victor had inspired. She saw me and waved, her smile bright enough to light the world. That afternoon, we drove to the cemetery. All of us together, me, Lily, Vanessa, Brett, even Howard. We brought flowers and stories, and a new children's book about a kind monster who teaches people to see it with their hearts instead of their eyes. Lily kneeled by Victor's headstone and traced the letters of his name with her small fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Books," she whispered, "for everything." Vanessa put her arm around my shoulders. Brett stood on my other side. We stayed there until the sun set. A family built not by blood or money, but by the hardest lessons and the truest love. They'd called me a gold digger, but I'd been the only one who loved him without counting the cost. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. Because karma doesn't just keep receipts, it writes the final chapter. And sometimes, just sometimes, that chapter ends in redemption. So they called her a gold digger, but she was the only one who loved him without counting the cost. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. Share it with someone who needs to remember that karma always keeps receipts. And subscribe, because I've got more stories that prove the truth always comes out in the end. Drop a comment. What would you have done in her situation? See you in the next one.